Okay, so hi. Today, I will be talking about my story for the video contest. It's the disappearance of Mr. Devenham by Agatha Christie. So now let's present the characters that we have in the story. We have Hercules Poirot, we have Captain Hastings, we have Inspector Japp, Inspector Miller, Mr. Lowen, Mr. Devenham, the missing person, Billy Kellett. Okay, so in brief resume, the story starts with Captain Hastings and Inspector Poirot, who are talking and waiting for Inspector Japp to arrive and join them at Scotland Yard. And shortly after Inspector Japp arrives on the scene with them, they start talking about the disappearance of Mr. Devenham, whose disappearance seemed very mysterious because he doesn't seem like a person who would be gone missing. And Mr. Devenham is a well-known banker and a financier of the city. And while these colleagues talk about the disappearance, Mr. Poirot bets his colleagues that he could probably solve this case without even moving from his own place. And while his colleagues think he's a little bit crazy, they accept his challenge, and as Poirot leads his investigation, finds many clues and finally achieves to crack the case and find the real solution to why the sudden mysterious disappearance of Mr. Devenham. And Mr. Devenham, in fact, did not disappear but went hiding because he was the real criminal behind all this. What the story tells us about knowledge is that to solve a case, detectives need a lot of knowledge and good skills because not everyone can think like they do, and to solve a case, they often have to think out of the box and see every little detail because everything is important and they need to be attentive. Also, this story talks about belief, and the word belief comes from believing. And in this story, from the beginning, all the detectives believe that the missing man had nothing to do with his own disappearance. In other words, belief is teaching us in this story that it isn't always true, even if every factor seems to pull towards it. We all have to have an open mind when solving a case and acknowledging all the possibilities. Similar to belief is uncertainty, which this story teaches us that a case is never certain and there's always a house in place for uncertainty because there could be a lot of possibilities and nothing is always guaranteed or certain, in other words. Okay, so what Poirot knows about the case is that on Saturday last, as his usual custom, Mr. Devenham took the 1240 train from Victoria to Chingside, where his palatial country seat, the Cedars, is situated. After lunch, he strolled down the grounds and gave various directions to the gardeners. Everybody agrees that his manners was absolutely normal as usual. After the tea, he put his head into his wife's boudoir, saying that he was going to stroll down the village and post some letters. He added that he was expecting a Mr. Lowen on business. If he could come before he himself returned, he was to be shown into the study and asked to wait. Mr. Devenham then left the house by the front door, passed leisurely down the drive and out the gate, and never was seen again. From that hour, he vanished completely. This passage can be found at page 123. Throughout his investigation, Poirot always thought he was right, and he always thought he was confident about what he thinks and he deducts from his investigation. But throughout his story, he always disapproved with the ideas of others. A good example for this is when Paul was analyzing the picture of the missing man. Paul directly knew in his mind that something was off, and while his colleagues thought that the man looked okay and was not suspicious at all, Paul on the other side thought that he was quite obscure and was probably hiding something. Paul thought that when something was obscure was a good sign, because the passage for this example can be found at 124 and it goes as follows. I find it a good sign when a case is obscure. If a thing is clear as daylight, being mistrusted, someone has made it so. When Paul finally cracks the case and solves the problem, he seems pretty confident in his findings, and every point he made is justified with reasonable information. The passage going along with this can be found at 126 and goes, "From the commencement, see you, it struck me that the safe burglary was somewhat remarkable. Jewels ready, money, bearer bonds, also conveniently arranged. For whom? Well, the good Monsieur Lavenham was one of those who look after number one, as your saying goes. It seemed almost certain that it was arranged for himself." Then his passion of late years for buying jewelry, how simple the fawn he embezzled, he converted into jewels, very likely practice, replacing them in turn with paste duplicates. And so he put away in a safe place under another name of considerable fortune to be enjoyed in good times when everyone has been thrown off to the track. Now let's talk a little bit about the themes the story has to present. Well, many themes rise in the context of this story. We could say that one of the themes would be mystery, because one of the questions the story is trying to ask is what happened to Mr. Debenham? Why did he suddenly disappear? In addition to this theme, we could also agree on another theme like corruption, fraud, or another word representing illegal action, because in the story, Mr. Debenham is corrupt and is the criminal in the story because he used money illegally. He bought jewels to duplicate them and make more money and take advantage of it.